Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the GovCon Giants podcast. Before we get started, if you would like to receive a newsletter from us every Friday discussing everything government contracts, where the opportunities are, upcoming videos, where are some of the conferences we're going to be attending, visit our website, govcongiants.com, and right at the top, you don't have to go far. When you go to the website, there's a box, put your email address in there, and hit subscribe, and that will put you on our newsletter so that you don't miss out on anything moving forward. Today's guest, Mr. Brian Sanvidge, works at a company, Anshin, out of New York, and what he does is he helps ensure that the small, large, and government entities are meeting their compliance goals when it comes to doing business with minorities, women, veterans. He's helping ensure that they meet their compliance goals. And so Mr. Brian Sanvidge, I brought him on here today because of all of the diversity and inclusion spend when it comes to these major contractors receiving awards. His company helps, and his team, they help actually with some of those awards and ensuring that DBEs participate along the process. And so I thought it was great to bring Brian on today because he, through this conversation, encouraged me to dive deeper into some of the DBE spends, because if in fact they're going to put teeth behind these programs, now I think it's worth its weight in gold. So again, stay tuned for this episode. I want to welcome Mr. Brian Sanvidge of Anshin.
Brian Sanvidge from Anshin, Anshin Block and Anshin here in New York. Looking forward to the conversation today.
Yes, thank you. And Brian, I have your LinkedIn profile pulled up. It says you're the principal leader of regulatory compliance and investigations. What does that mean?
So I've assembled a team of 20 individuals that are forensic compliance, investigative folks full-time. That's what we do. So we work for half the time we work for the government. The other half of the time we work for individual entities, not-for-profit, for-profit companies, either doing investigations or government compliance for them.
Okay.
We're housed in a public accounting firm, but we don't do tax or audit work at all. The folks on my team.
That's what we would assume.
Yeah. So we're strictly on the the RCI side, regulatory compliance, investigations, forensic accounting, computer forensics. It all kind of flows into it. If there's a dispute, and often there's numbers involved, we'll be involved. And then also on the government compliance side, which then runs the whole gamut. We do quite a few different types of government compliance regulatory work.
All right. So that we don't have people just turn us off, let's discuss what you said, because regulatory compliance doesn't seem fun, right? Let's talk about an applicable situation of regulatory compliance. On your website, on your LinkedIn profile, discuss minority, women, disadvantaged, and small business compliance. Maybe that might help some of our listeners understand more, talk to exactly what you're doing.
Sure. So when you look at both certified and not yet certified firms, women, minority owned businesses, historically underutilized businesses and groups, often on government contracts, now even being written into bonds. We're starting to see requirements and goals put right in on construction projects and different type of public work that's going on, not the least of which the new stimulus package that's out right now in the last 6 months out of the federal government. But when you look at it on the construction side, what we're now starting to see is 15% women-owned business, 15% minority-owned businesses, up to 6% of service-related disabled veteran organizations that have to participate in these. In New York State, there was a change to the law now 2 years ago, Article 15A, that really expanded the certified firms, expanded the net worth and the opportunities there, and the bidding type information. You can now be a bidder on one if you're certified and be 10% more than other bidders and still be deemed the lowest responsible bidder. So it's really driving a lot of opportunity for those organizations and the certified firms.
And so your team of 20, you help some of the large businesses meet those goals or become compliant. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, so we'll work, as I said, both on the government side and for large corporations. So if you take, some of the larger builders in the country that are working on projects, their project may have a 30% goal. That's not unusual in it. So we'll work with them to make sure before that job is bought out, that we identify who are the firms, because of mobilization cost, who would make a good candidate to participate in it. We'll do those outreach for them. We'll work closely with the procurement folks on the contract side of it to make sure that those opportunities are there, and then conduct outreach sessions and do the introductions if someone's either going to qualify as a prime bidder or is going to be a second tier bidder for it.
Wow, nice.
And then the flip side of that is doing that for the government. So sometimes I'm the independent compliance officer, where we'll work for the government, and we're ultimately at that point paid by the government to make sure that if on a project has a 30% goal, 33% goal, 36 now is starting to become more and more common, that the contract, everybody working on it ultimately is able to meet the goals that are in an individual project. And we're also starting to see that now going into whether it's on the funding side of it. And so many, these large projects, there are multiple funding streams that come in. Each one of those funding stream have different requirements and goals that are set. And, how does a contractor ultimately comply with all of those?
Let me ask you, because from my understanding, and where's your office based out of? What areas do you service? Let's say that. Let's take.
I service across the country. We work. We're from Texas. We do a lot of work in Texas, Florida. We're based here out of New York. So my office is in Manhattan. We're right in Midtown Manhattan. Pre-pandemic, there was 400 folks in our office working in the Manhattan office. 20 on my team. 2 years ago, we ended up with 400 people going home and working all remotely. So it's the new norm, and that's working out well.
Did you sell your penthouse out of New York?
So I never had a penthouse there, but
it's easy.
it does. I do have a 3-hour commute each way by Amtrak to the office. So
yeah, I don't think people know. When you say you live upstate New York, you're pretty upstate, huh?
I always say, let's define upstate. I'm up north of Albany. I'm in the Capital District area of upstate, so I have a 3-hour Amtrak ride every day, each way.
Wow. Nice. Wow. So now
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Continue.
No, I was just going to say that, so with that, our office is in Manhattan. We also have an office in West Palm. But for the most part, I tell, my staff, what's important is to live by an airport. You got to be able to, go to where the clients have a need, or where a project's ultimately going on.
And so now, if I am do you have a typical size company that you work with? I know you said government agencies, but for example, if I, I don't know, we do 50 million, let's say a year, and I have a project that I've got these goals on, is that when I pick up the phone and say, hey, Brian, can you help me out? Can you guys come in and take a look and figure out how to help me meet these goals?
Yes, absolutely. And there's, certain, economies of scale with it. So it depends on what the project is. Because then we also do, on the good faith effort side of it, is to work with the contractor if they failed. So we've been brought in with projects that are as small as $500,000,
wow.
but that there was a lack of understanding of the requirement side as to what was needed. So then we worked with the government entity and the contractor, demonstrating the good faith efforts and what ultimately went into that. That was a federal government contract, had WBE requirements on it. And, but, most of the time it would, the projects are usually larger than $10 million, but we just finished, the Rochester School District, some modernization, 770 million in construction there for the schools in Rochester, New York, but have done, projects all over. So there's, depending on what the needs are and, as what's there. The real successful projects, especially on the construction side or on the larger government side, is prior to a job being bought out, is really investing the time to see where are we going to get our compliance? How are we going to drive MWBE opportunities, for a specific area? And ultimately, whether it's a firm that can be a prime, and if they're going to be a prime, do they meet the financial requirements to be a prime? If they don't, how do we get them subcontracting opportunities that are there? What are the issues with bonding, Davis-Bacon, prevailing wage type stuff, and cash flow often becomes a problem or a concern for smaller entities as to how they deal with cash flow. So on those, we'll work at the contract level. Can we do, twice a month payments to some of our smaller contractors, and subcontractors to help them with cash flow?
That sounds really, really good. It does. Now, what if I'm the small guy and I'm working with a large prime who is not doing the responsible thing? Can I reach out to you?
So we get brought, so often when I'm like the independence compliance officer, those complaints or those issues would come right to me. And the idea is we have to have a level playing field.
Right.
You can't have, and often because of the nature of the industry, that may not be the case. Cash flow, can really be a problem. So if your paperwork, if there's issues, if there's scheduling issues that may delay someone's pay app, that's a significant problem, especially for a smaller business.
Right.
How do you deal with that on the cash flow side? So yeah, we'll deal with that, and we deal with it on the program side. So when we're looking at a program, often we'll get both sides together and say, okay, here's the issue, here are both sides of it. How do we ultimately get this resolved? Let's keep the job moving. Let's keep the contract moving. But how do we get this shot? What we're seeing right now, when you got both increased labor cost and material costs, and you have contracts that potentially were bid a year ago,
Right.
and we got, your labor costs are 8%, your material costs 20, 40% more potentially. How do we deal with those issues as to out there? And part of it is driving a conversation, and having both sides sit down and trying to work through it.
Well, I can tell you my experience has been, they told me that your contract says no escalation clauses. That's just how it's been handled.
Yep.
I'm just being honest. That's how it was handled.
No, that is not uncommon.
Right.
And so how do you ultimately deal with that? Is there any, flexibility? The ultimate goal here is to build these smaller businesses, build these women and minority owned businesses to increase capacity, and then ultimately have them go on. We like to see them when they graduate. So in New York State, to be a certified firm, the owners have to have a personal net worth of under $15 million.
Okay.
I always say it's a tremendous success when they outgrow that, when they
Sure.
literally, we refer to it, you've graduated, from a certified firm. Those are under, Article 15A that the state updated 2 years ago, but, all with the goal of driving and increasing capacity.
So now let's talk about from I'm the small business, right? Let's tell me some of your experiences. I know that you came back and when you were at New York State, tell us about your job and what did you do there in terms of like the labor department that you did service?
Sure. So I did a career in government prior to going into consulting, and 12 years of that, I was the New York State Labor Inspector General. So would have overseen investigations, both civil and criminal, internal audit, government contracting. One of the biggest pieces at the Department of Labor, not only are all the wage and hour worker protection components that flow into it, but also the unemployment insurance system that would, that flowed through the Department of Labor. One of the things that often people don't know is DOL in New York State. It's formed by the Triangle, it was created after the Triangle Shirt Fire, where more than 100 workers died in a factory fire. So the Department of Labor was created, for the benefit of workers. So often you'd have employers say, well, that doesn't help me. Well, that's not what DOL was created for. It was created for the benefit of workers, the workforce, and the protection of the workers that were there. So I oversaw the civil criminal sides of it, as well as the audit, both internal and external.
So the civil criminal side, meaning that someone did something wrong and then you had to make a decision of how wrong it was. Is that plain English?
Yeah, absolutely. So what would happen is so if there was an allegation of misconduct, theft, of some sort,
Right.
theft of government resources.
Right.
What ultimately went into it? So in New York State, you have what's called the 6303, which is the executive law that takes the executive agencies and refers the prosecution for those to the Attorney General's office. So we would work very closely with the Attorney General to prosecute those cases. But what happened is there were so many of them to do. We then started dealing with the 62 district attorneys around New York State and referred the cases and worked closely there for the prosecution and ultimately the restitution and everything, not to mention the least of which there's a tremendous deterrent effect when people understand what can happen when you're involved in that misconduct, especially at that level where it's a criminal case.
So taking that back to my small businesses, when we're doing certified payroll, that's all Department of Labor.
Absolutely.
All right.
And I was involved with when we created the certified payroll forms in New York State. And the idea was we wanted you to certify that those wages, whether it be Davis Bacon prevailing rate, that the right wages were paid on time, the right amount, and you're signing it. Because what people don't realize on a certified payroll, you're submitting that to a government entity. It's called offering a false instrument for filing. It's a Class E felony if it's materially false. So I used to always say to people, you submitted 12 of them. We've got your attention. That's 12 separate felonies if someone wanted to charge you for that. Now, sometimes it's an innocent mistake, so we never treated it criminally. But other times you're looking at it, there was an intent. There was an intent to deprive the workers of what they should have been paid for the proper rate and classification, whether they be classified as an employee or an independent contractor. And most of the issues surrounded which public rate, which Davis Bacon rate should have been used on the project for each individual trade, and to make sure that that was paid. And then overtime benefits and everything that flows into that.
Sometimes I've had projects where they didn't even list my rate that was there when they provided me the documents for the solicitation. The categories and the names of the rates were the ones that applied to my particular job. They weren't there. So what would you tell someone to do in that case?
Get it clarified by the government, get it clarified by the Department of Labor. If it's a New York City job, by the city comptroller's office, who has the authority over if it's located in the 5 boroughs. I've defended those. And the government's going to look at it as you as the contractor, you're the business, you should have known, even though that the forms had the wrong rate on it, had the wrong rate schedule.
Get out of here. Come on, bro.
You don't want to put yourself in that position, because I will tell you, going through the regulatory and defending those contracts as to what ultimately happens administratively. You're the business. You should have known better. You should have asked. Well, they told me that it was a laborer's work, or it was mason and tender's work. No, it wasn't. It was carpentry work, or whatever the issue may have been.
Right.
You're now on the hook for it. So a significant industry issue right now. Are flaggers at a job crossing guards, or are they flaggers for safety? The difference is almost $30 an hour on the rate. You bid the job and you made a mistake, and the contract may have said that they're crossing guards. They're far enough away from the construction site so that they're not flagging the site and protecting the site. They're protecting pedestrians walking back and forth. You want to make sure that that's accurate, that they are crossing guards and not flaggers. If they're flagging and they're on site and they're protecting the site and equipment's moving around, you don't want to have that determination made that they should have been flaggers, where you have approximately $30 an hour difference in what the wage rate is. And then you look at it, you say, okay, $30 an hour. Okay, $30 an hour. Now let's look back at every job you did. Department of Labor can go back 6 years. Okay, the individual employee worked 1,000 hours a year on that type work. And then you start looking at liquidated damages up to a maximum of 200%. Damages that the employee didn't get up to 200%. Interest from the day it wasn't paid at 16%. You quickly get to a multiplier of 2, 3, 4, 5 times the unpaid wage, depending on how egregious it was and how willful the misconduct was. So for a contractor, a small businessman, you think of how do they deal with that? Especially on a government contract where the government says, no, they're crossing guards. you want to verify that and make sure that they may be, but you want to look at it. That type of information up front, can really help and save the economics of a business. When you think about what that liability is.
They're putting a lot of the onerous on the small business.
It's really unfortunate because that's really, it does roll that way. So, and I would say, I spend, you and I were chatting earlier, I spend a lot of time, having these conversations with businesses, especially small businesses. How do you protect yourself to make sure that this doesn't happen to you? Because if it does, it doesn't matter if you're a, Fortune 50 company or a small company, the penalties and the remedies are pretty much the same. The difference is in the size of the company, the resources to be able to defend it and ultimately get it resolved is where it's significantly different. So spending that time up front, understanding what the regs are, and we're living in, in an environment where the regulatory environment has been changing, and we're seeing this. So, what is the regulatory environment for the particular contract that you're working on? Just make sure you understand it. And you want to make sure you understand it before you bid it. You don't want to be locked into a contract where you thought that they were going to be crossing guards and they're actually flaggers, and you have to have 4 there during the site 8 or 10 hours a day. That can obviously have a significant impact on the economics of the contract.
Wow. And, again, I've had that where we've had different levels, right? So level 1, level 2, level 3 persons based on their experience and things like that. I'm here on the Department of Labor's website. Do you think, and again, this is an opinion, we're not holding to it. I'm actually happy you're not attorneys. So that's good, right?
Yeah, so let me be clear.
Attorneys never have an opinion, right? They don't have an opinion, But I mean, if you're saying confirm that information, because to me, this is really important for the small person doing this, because we all have to submit certified payroll reports. Do you think that just getting it from the Department of Labor's website is adequate and sufficient?
Maybe, and I'm sure that's not the answer you want, but I mean,
we can't get government. I mean, it's just really hard for us to get the government people on the phone and respond.
It absolutely is. So you got to first do the research yourself and see where you are, and then see what does the language of the contract say. If ultimately you have an issue that you're not sure, are they flaggers? Are they crossing guards? Then you got to bring it to someone's attention. You really want to get that ultimately flushed out, because you want to make sure that that classification issue is addressed, especially when you look at it on a small business. On a small business, smaller contract, do you have individuals that are potentially doing multiple trades? So during the course of the day, are they doing work that fits into different public rate schedules? And how do you ultimately, deal with that? So it's important to have that information. Try to get it clarified prior to the bidding, because you ultimately, as we all know, when you're bidding and your contract's there and it's in place, those type of mistakes, the individual who won the contract could be bearing the burden of that.
Right. That's very true. What happens in the case where I'm a contractor, I've asked for certified payroll for my subcontractors who did the work, and they were not able to give me the certified payrolls?
So the issue is, if they don't give them to you, then you look at it as to why can't you get them? Because now one of the important parts that we have is that the Wage Theft Prevention Act. And what does that mean to contractors? Where you're dealing on these payrolls, as to what level of verification. So if you have to have those, if you're not getting them, then you got to follow up as to, why you're not getting them. And that may not be the subcontractor that you're going to want to use. That, and then part of it is, we just coming out of the pandemic, the construction side, we had jobs starting, jobs closing down, increased labor cost, increased material costs. Are the subs that you had been using historically financially as sound as they were 2 or 3 years ago when you were dealing with them, just because of the changes in the economy? What's going on post the pandemic, coming as we come out of it, with labor costs, material costs, and what happened during that period of time? Were they working on projects that got shut down, and now therefore cash flow problems or issues are arising that are out there?
Well, I can tell you this, and I like it from a high level, but when you're down here where we're at, we already have there's so many fewer suppliers and contractors to choose from, right? I mean, we just don't have a whole lot of choices and options. I mean, I received an email just before we jumped on with a company that won a project here in my area, South Florida. They can't find subcontractors, and so that is becoming more and more the norm. It's just the lack of finding subcontractors that can actually do the work. And then you want me to throw out the people that may not be as strong as they've been in the past?
Well, I want you to definitely be aware of it.
Okay.
You have a subcontractor working for you, and they fall down on the job, whether it's cash flow, whether it's a technical issue, whether it's a labor force issue. They can't ultimately get the labor. They can't get materials. So let's talk about a two-party check or something like that to ultimately be able to help them on the material side of it. But, because you always have to keep in mind, what is the impact if that sub ultimately can't perform and falls down on the job and doesn't do it? You're either now going to self-perform it, and it may be a trade that you usually don't self-perform, or you're bringing someone else in, and that's often not the most efficient way to do it when a contract's halfway through on a subcontract and you got to bring in another business to finish that part of the contract for you.
Okay. No.
And you're tied to a contract price, and you had a subcontract at X dollars, and now all of a sudden you're at X plus 30%, and that 30% you're going to be absorbing as the prime contractor on that.
That's actually brings me to another question that I thought about. Based on your recent experiences with, particularly, let's talk about the escalation in cost. Have you seen any changes to the way that the government is writing the language in terms of how we're handling that issue? Because I think just asking the prime to absorb it is not a remedy for it's just not a remedy that's going to go over well for anyone.
That's not a good starting point. and you're not negotiating from a position of strength by
right.
So we talk about having that level playing field. Now, part of it is the importance of being able to do that and being able to negotiate that fair price. But we are seeing you had contracts that were let in 20 that we're working on in 21 or 22 or were bid, and you're putting your bid documents together at the end of 20, and now you're getting it because of a host of reasons. You're actually in the field working in 22 at the difference of cost. What are the your labor and material costs? So in dealing with that and having those conversations, but you absolutely have very little area to go in. So what we are seeing right now is on the bidding side of it, what we're seeing right now, here's my price, it's good for 30 days. It's a very narrow point of time as to where you are. And if it's, there has to be changes, then we're going to have to talk about it, but I can only hold my price. I've had some on the contracts right now where they're saying I can hold for 15 days. I don't know where the material costs are ultimately going to be.
Very true.
So we're seeing that, we're doing the outreach on a large government funded project right now. Yesterday, we did more than 100 calls to women and minority owned businesses, driving some attention to the project and letting people know about the opportunities that are there. One of the things that's really interesting is capacity. They just often there's just not enough capacity right now to meet it. So how do we work with and grow and build the capacity of these firms so that they can do larger, more complex work?
And do you have any, I guess, ideas that you can share here about how you build those capacity?
Sure.
Is that some proprietary stuff?
Yeah. Well, let's just talk about it. One of the things that drives capacity, is you're being able to do the job, demonstrate it, being able to do larger jobs. So whether if it's a job that's requiring bonding, working, to get your finances in order. So A, you can get bonded. B, you can increase your bonding capacity. But one of the things that we see before we're even there is cash flow. So you were talking earlier about, certified payrolls. So now we're dealing with a public work Davis-Bacon job. Payrolls can be, 40, 50% of the job cost, depending on the trade and where we are. And your workers have to get paid every week. So how do you're doing every 30 days, you're putting in a pay app. The pay app is being reviewed. We like to say it's reviewed for 15 days. We're all in the real world that if you got, often it's, it's closer to 30 days where we're doing those. How do you deal with cash flow? So one of the things is where we've worked with is let's set up where we do twice a month. Let's do a pay app. So now you're not being out there 45 days from that first paycheck,
right?
That you've had first payroll you've had to meet before you've got revenue coming in.
Right.
And how can we do that? And we're starting, we're seeing a lot of very positive response on that. And how do we set that up for businesses then to expand, have a larger workforce, and ultimately build capacity, their own internal capacity, which then drives the capacity in the market.
Are you saying the large business, are they seem supportive of those ideas, or are they, just ideas to throw out? Because I have not seen that in practice. Again, it sounds good. I just haven't seen it in practice.
Yep. So we're seeing it on large jobs, but we are seeing it. It's a conversation. You have to have it, but you got to have it up front.
Oh, right.
So when it definitely has to be up front. No one likes surprises. Where are we? So when we're dealing with these on a publicly funded project, we're saying, let's talk about it. You were saying that we want to have between 36%, MWBE or small business, historically underutilized businesses involved in the project. We want to see a workforce that represents the community that we're building in or working in. So how do you do that? So on the workforce side, we have to do it through a project labor agreement often, and get buy-ins from the business agents and the union. So we do that. And then, but on the job side of it, let's talk about, and it adds cost. It definitely adds, there's cost to it. So everyone has to recognize that. We all agree it's very important that it get done, but we got to give the tools to everybody involved, whether it be from the project to the large contractors down to the individual businesses that are going to participate into it. And you got to have that buy-in. And if you don't have that buy-in, which often is driven by actually the owner, who's the client on it and where's the government's position on it, you get the buy-in at that level and you put together a plan. That's the times when you see it where it's most successful.
Okay, that's fair. Now, okay, and that's good. And that's great if Anshin is involved, right? Now, what about instances where Anshin or someone like an Anshin is not involved?
So I think it's got to be during the contract point, so we're seeing it now where you've got, whether it's for internal, all the right reasons, large contractors are saying, we're going to do a 20% spend across the board, whether we're obligated to or not, with MWBE firms, or on a government contract where it's anywhere from 20 to 36%. We're going to see a spend to disadvantaged individuals and businesses. How do we do that? So if you have that conversation up front, I want to bid it. Here's how we can do it, but I can't be out 45 or 60 days in order to be able to do it. Just the cash flow, especially, a labor intense job, public works job where your payroll numbers are high, as to how do you ultimately get that done?
Yeah. Well, and I'm actually really encouraged by that because a buddy of mine from college was a former supply diversity buyer at GE. And he said his challenge with finding small businesses, they didn't pay you for 6 months.
Yep.
He goes, that's just, he says it's not that we wanted to wait 6 months to pay you. He said, we just, we cross our T's and dot our I's.
Yep.
Like, you can't cross them faster.
That's a good point.
That was kind of, and again, he's a corporate guy now, right? But
yep.
He said it was 6 months before people get paid.
And that's unfair,
That's
but
really
I also
unfair, right? When you're
tremendously, because you're putting everybody at such a disadvantage for that.
Right.
What type of entities can absorb that? And if they are exorbitant, they're building it into their cost. If they're going to have to carry it for 6 months, if they're able to, they're obviously that's going to be reflected in their proposal or bid.
And they're not going to want that. They wouldn't want that as well.
Nope.
They're going to complain about the cost now.
Absolutely. And so, so on that is when you're looking at it is to, how do you deal with it? That conversation up front. And you don't have to have someone like Anshin be involved, and you don't have to have, on these largest projects. But I think it's, listen, we want to bid the job. Here's where we are. These are going to be our challenges. Now, the flip side of it is the small businesses. They got to make sure their paperwork is right. It's together the way it should be. They have to invest the time in that. We oversee, pay apps on, construction jobs that have, more than $20 million a month in pay apps going through there. And we don't want to have us be sending back the pay app because they don't have the proper documentation. They don't have the proper signatures. There was a change order that's time and materials, and you haven't included the time cards. You don't have the sign-offs on it, and you're, ultimately, it slows down the process. And if you slow down the process and you're on a job that has a payment date of the 15th of every month, if you don't meet that, you now may be waiting till next month to get that check.
So, that's interesting that you mentioned that, Brian. So those are the things that we talk about with small business. So those are the things I teach people, because what I find is that so many people in the industry push small businesses to get certifications, but no one teach them how to run the business. And so, yes, we could get the certifications and we could stand up the small business, but like you said, then we complain about when we're not being paid on time, or there's an issue because we failed to learn or understand what was the requirements going into the project.
Eric, as you know, it's so often you have these businesses that are just standing up and just building out their small businesses, and they're in the field doing the work.
Yes,
and
correct.
They got to bid the work. They got to chase it. They got the supply side.
Right.
After they finish that, that's a full day. We're now 10, 12 hours into the day. Right. Now at the end, now they got to still run their business. Yes. Now they're doing that at night. So it's that whole business side to it. And when they're, the smaller the entity, you just don't have the luxury of having an accounts payable or an accounts receivable personnel, department is. So who's collecting those certified payrolls?
Right.
And the amount of time that goes through, and are they accurate? And do you have the information there? Do you have everything that's put in for your pay app so it can easily go through the system? So when you have an internal auditor, like Sanvidge at Anshin looking at it on a large government project, we're not kicking it back and going back to a prime who's got to go back to a sub and then worry that, ultimately your payment's going to be slowed down. So it's ultimately making, setting the time aside, because you got to run the business. You also got to get the work done. So often that gets pushed into the evening, but it's, it's equally as important that you get it done.
Yeah, no, it's a tough gig. And I try to let people know all sides of it. And that's why when people ask me, what do I do? I said, well, I pretty much teach federal contract law, because really, we talk about the law and the regulations and compliance more than anything else.
Sure.
Right. Because that's so important. And ensuring that, again, it's one thing to win a project, but then to complete the project on time, within budget, and make a profit. That's like, to me, that's 90% of it.
Yep. You're absolutely right. And how do you do that? And all three of those pieces have to come together: time, budget, profit, and then ultimately when they do come together, now you're able to do larger projects, more, more projects and everything else. And now you're really starting to grow your small business, which, for the most part is everyone's goal.
And again, we service people all over the country. But do you work at the state level, or do you have any knowledge of the state? I know you work from New York and you've worked with some municipalities. Have you worked with any state, like on state level contracts?
We do. We get brought in by municipalities. We get brought in by the state. And so, as I was saying to you, so half the time it's on the contractor side. The other time it's on the enforcement side, the investigative side, as to ultimately what's ultimately going on. So there we work either for the government or for the contractor, on that. And the issue is it's all to drive compliance. So we, across the country, we are often brought in on the monitoring side, where we're going to monitor a contract to make sure that there's compliance there, because there may have been a historical issue or there was a concern at bidding or something. But there was, for whatever the reason was, the contract was awarded. How do you work and I always say, when we're monitoring a company, we shouldn't be, the penalty of it. We're there to help you get through it. Make sure you're ultimately doing it and you're following, all of the regulations, and whatever brought you to have a monitor in place, that we make sure that that issue doesn't happen again.
If someone was watching this and they felt that there was a contract that was not meeting the compliance, could they reach out to you or your firm?
They could, yeah, absolutely, and they could reach out to the government. But if someone that scenario came up and they had a question, we'd be happy to run down the answer as to who the appropriate entity would be to either look into it or to help them with it. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I mean, again, sometimes we feel, again, and I'm just speaking from a small business guy, right? I'm on the other side. Sometimes we feel like the government doesn't care. That's how we feel. I'm not saying it's the perspective. That's not saying it's the truth, right?
But
we feel that way because we're saying the government obviously is aware that they're not compliant, right? Like we could see that they're not compliant, so they're not doing anything enforcement about it.
Eric, I appreciate the comment. Like I said, I did it 26 years in government, and I understand how you get that feeling. So government also is, has limited resources. We try to say, oh, it's the government, they have unlimited resources. Not true. So they're prioritizing what they're ultimately looking at, whether it be the wage and hour, whether it be the regulatory, it's, so you're looking at these, issues that are out there. So when I'm dealing with a client and they have an issue that they need to bring to the government side, we try to package it all for the government. Here's the case. Here's exactly what happened. Here's all the facts. Could you look into this? And it makes it that much, easier for them. Government has same, issues that everybody else does with resources and being able to prioritize what is out there. And then don't forget, as administrations change, whether it be at the city level or the national level, priorities change as to what may be really driving it. And those priorities, can impact ultimately regulatory enforcement. We see that all the time.
And I'm happy that you said that, because I want the people listening to this to gain that insight perspective, so that you're saying to yourself, rather than becoming frustrated and upset, you're saying, well, maybe, like you said, they're looking at some other things that this hasn't come across their desk because they are limited in resources and they're trying to manage an entire city. And so that I don't want people to be discouraged by that and not to do something. So we're giving people an option and saying, hey, there's someone now you can reach out to if you do have that level of concern. And
with that, you take, having overseen hundreds of investigators and auditors in my career and had a large team in government, they all have 50 cases on their desk or 12 open audits. So how do you get it to rise to the level where your case is important to somebody? Part of it is making it a lot easier for them. Putting together, just don't go in and complain that, hey, here's where I have issues on it. Here's actually the facts. Here's the whole fact pattern. Here's what happened, whether it be on the bidding, the contracting side, or actually on the actual contract as it's being performed. I was told I had to do X. Someone's asking me to do X plus, or when I bid it, they told me it was going to be this. And now when you look at the actual work going on, that's not what was originally bid. So what's there, but you want to make sure you be able to, put that together so you have that information. It's clear, it's concise, and you can turn it over to the right regulators, enforcement folks, or contract administrators to bring it to their attention.
Good. No, that's fair. And I'm happy to hear from your standpoint that you're seeing this written into the language in terms of bonding as well, and it's coming down from the owners. Only because, again, I just attended WBE, and it really seemed like people are interested in just collecting information, putting it into a database more so than actually getting you to work on the contracts. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to ever say this to you, and I'm sure
now checking the box had been the norm for an awful long time. We are seeing, I think there's tremendous political pressure on it. There's tremendous social pressure being put on it, and we're seeing the buy-in from the owners. Absolutely. And yet, some of the largest technology companies in the world coming out talking about what their spend was going to be across the platform. We're starting to see it on the building side, what's going on there with some of the larger building construction firms across the country, and them making commitments on D&I, diversity and inclusion spends with firms where they're not required to. They're doing it as part of their corporate culture. I think that's really important. I think we're going to see that continue to grow that, a lot more.
Nice. No, I like that. I like that. Well, I thank you and for coming on and sharing that information, because it's great to get a different perspective, especially from someone who's actually out there helping these large companies, helping these large organizations meet their compliance and all these things that we read about in the news. Is there anything in particular that came down from this latest infrastructure plan that is worth talking about or discussing?
I think just, one of the things that's out there is, we start to see the infrastructure plan being rolled out. Everybody's got to keep in mind also, just, unrelated to that, was the Wage Theft Act that was passed. So wage theft, what does that mean? So if you're a small contractor and you can't ultimately meet your payroll obligations or the right ones, that's going to roll up to somebody, whether it be the contractor you were working for or the prime or the program manager. So under the Wage Theft Prevention Act that we have now across the country, we're starting to see that we need to make sure that contractors are paying attention to it, because they could have a liability that's coming out 2-3 years from now because a subcontractor working for them did not meet their wage and hour obligations. And those type things are, can be years down the road where all of a sudden someone's going to have a liability that they didn't know about. The bonding companies are paying attention to it now. We need the contractors and the small contractors to really pay attention to it, to make sure that they don't get hit with that liability at a later date.
And so what you're saying, as so myself, as I hire subcontractors, I need to just make sure that I need to not just resubmit the information they submitted to me. I need to check it and verify it. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And Eric, you weren't planning on that originally. You were planning on getting a certified payroll and running it all through. So if that certified payroll, the payroll information may have been accurate on it, the numbers, but they didn't actually pay the workers. Those workers are ultimately through the Department of Labor, US DOL or state DOL, and civil suits, because there can be attorney's fees involved on it. So we're seeing a lot of litigation in that space. What happens is you hire subcontractor A and B to work on your contractor where you're the prime.
Yes.
One or both of those subs does not pay the proper wage in the timely manner that they were supposed to. Under wage theft, if they can't pay it, Eric, you're on the hook for it.
How would I know if they paid it or not?
That's the whole, that whole, part of that's the tricky part. You have to verify that information, because ultimately under the wage theft prevention, it's going to roll up to you. It was a contract that you had, because what the government was looking for when they wrote the Wage Theft Prevention Act and it was passed was, what are the deepest pockets out there? Is the industry intentionally, are people not being paid? And these aren't, an innocent mistake where, a contractor, because of cash flow or something, fell down. It's, someone that intentionally didn't pay the proper rate or something like that. And then that subcontractor either goes away or doesn't have the ability to pay it. Ultimately, Eric's going to pay it. And if you don't have it, it's going up. It's just going up the line. Yeah. So it's something you really want to be concerned about. So one of the things I always say to clients, when you're out in the field, when you're on the site, we're doing it, but, on the smaller contracts, what is the head count? Who's there? And then ultimately looking at the payroll information. So when you're out there, you're saying, yeah, they were doing, mason and tenders work. They were doing masonry work. They were doing carpentry work. And what should have flowed into those certified payrolls. And then if they're working for you, request proof of payment. You want to see in their pay app to you that their workforce was paid the right rate, and on time. Because you ultimately could have the liability. And under the Department of Labor, that liability can look backwards 6 years.
And when did this start to take place?
So the Wage Theft Prevention Act has been in for about a year right now.
Wow. I mean, you came on right on time.
Well, I'm passionate about this, and I'm passionate about making sure folks entities really are aware of what the liabilities are. Because when we're defending them, I'm having the conversation ultimately as to what the potential cost of this can be, back to the government with liquidated damages, fines, and penalties. It's tremendous.
And so really this can flow back up to the government.
Well, ultimately, no, the government carves themselves out of it. They're not going to pay.
Okay, all right. All right, bro. I was like, that sounds too good to be true.
Yeah, no,
Okay, they're carved out of it, right? It
it's who the
stops at
government's
me.
paying. Yep,
All right.
it's ultimately who the government's paying.
All
You know,
right.
as to where the liability is.
I love it. I love it. All right. Anything else that we should know before we jump off today?
Not at this point. I enjoyed the conversation today, Eric.
No. Listen, thank you, Brian, for coming on, man. I'm actually that alone at the very end was definitely something that I think is super helpful, and that small businesses need to know and be aware of, because we are, like you said, there is a lot of compliance. There's a lot of documents. We have to get the work done. We have to try to stay within budget. And then now we've got to make sure that the people that we hire are paying their people the right wages and on time. So, but it's better to know that than to not know it, right? And because
you don't want to be
liable. Yeah, you don't want to
Yep.
be surprised. You're still liable either way of the two buckets.
And their wages, they're not even dischargeable in bankruptcy.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's deep.
Yep.
So you might be selling your house to pay somebody's salary from 3 years ago.
For someone who didn't work for you, worked for somebody else.
Somebody
that
else.
was a subcontractor.
Subcontractor.
Yep.
Wow. Are they going retroactive on that? Because
No. So the issue becomes it's work that started in January of 22.
Okay.
But what if there was a change order on a job that started in 21? Does that change order in February of 22 ultimately kick in Wage Theft Prevention Act? A lot of attorneys will tell you yes.
Well, I mean, those are just very unique cases. So I guess
Exactly. Yep.
For the most part, it's times 22. Nice. Well, Brian, listen, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time today. It was a blast. I'm happy we got a chance to talk about Alaska prior to the call and found out a little about you and your company and what you guys do. So thank you, Brian.
Good conversation, Eric. I enjoyed it. Let's stay in touch.
And we will have all of the show notes and all the information of today's conversation on our website, govcongiants.com/podcast. Thank you.
By the way, if you made it this far, that's incredible. Thank you so much for continuing to watch. A few quick programming notes. If you are not on our email list, make sure to sign up on our email list. Go to govcongiants.com. In the top box, there's a box there. Just put your email, hit subscribe. It'll send you a confirmation. You've got to verify that your email is valid. But once you do that, you will have access to our newsletter subscription where we discuss everything government contracting, how to be compliant, how to participate in some of the programs, the processes, upcoming events, specials that we may have on all of our programs and things that we're participating in, that things that we are a part of. And so again, we just want to keep people informed out there because we want to be your go-to source for information related to federal contracting. So we hope that we can do that. And we hope that we're bringing you great content. And again, if there's nothing or something that you have an issue with, please let us know because we like feedback. So give us feedback in the comments, in the descriptions. And again, we welcome you and we thank you for being a loyal fan, a loyal subscriber, and a listener of our show. Thanks so much. Again, this episode will be posted on govcongiants.com/podcast.